Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Armidale Regional Council, the 28th of October. It's a big agenda, so we'll get underway. As the Interim Administrator of Armidale Regional Council, I declare that I will undertake the duties of the Office of Interim Administrator in the best interest of our community and faithfully and impartially carry out the functions, powers, authorities and discretions invested in me to the best of my skill and judgment. The recognition of traditional owners. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. The Armidale regional community pays tribute to their love of land, love of people and love of culture. Now, Mr. General Manager.
The meeting is being audio and video recorded, and recordings of the non-confidential parts of the meeting will be made available on the internet. No persons are permitted to record the meeting unless specifically authorised by the Council to do so. In terms of the public addresses, which we have 7 this evening, all speakers are requested to ensure their comments are relevant to the particular agenda item. The chairperson may withdraw the privilege to speak where the speaker makes personal remarks or criticisms or uses abusive or inappropriate language. Speakers do not enjoy any special protection arising from comments made during council meetings and should therefore refrain from making defamatory remarks or personal defamatory statements against any individual. And also, we ask those present to please ensure your mobile phones are turned off. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Apologies, obviously there's none. Disclosures of interests. There is one.
I have received a disclosure of interest from the Interim Administrator. It's a non-pecuniary, non-significant conflict in regard to item 11.11, the Guyra Spring Flower Festival, as the people, Peter and Wendy Mulligan, invited the Interim Administrator's grandchildren, their parents and the Interim Administrator to visit their property to witness a farm and lambs on the 4th of October. And that declaration has been provided to me in hard copy and will be recorded in the minutes.
Thanks for that. Public forum. The first speaker is Ms Robinson, speaking on item 9.8, review of Council's committee structure. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. I passionately support openness and transparency. And since this report says the review of committees is already underway, let's hear all about it. We all want to know what extra analysis and community engagement might be needed to achieve what everyone wants, committees that function effectively. I'm also passionate about making the best use of our highly experienced and well-qualified volunteers, and thank them from the bottom of my heart for giving their time and expertise for free. Council must value and encourage their input and provide the necessary backup and support to help them do what's needed. Excellent examples of what can be achieved are the Crime Prevention Working Group's assistance with a successful funding application and the Climate Emergency Working Group's comprehensive analysis report, including options for future funding for this region. Well done, group members. Council committees were in fact reviewed by expert Ian Reynolds. His report, and that's the front cover of it, in March 2019, recommended pretty much what we have now. Overarching advisory committees, such as the Business Advisory Committee, Health and Wellbeing and Environmental Sustainability Committees, and the working groups that I think we all recognise can claim some remarkably good achievements. The history of this is that councillors had to wait 3 months before seeing the Reynolds report, and then it was combined with a completely different set of recommendations made at short notice in the business papers for the June 2019 meeting. Not surprisingly, therefore, the item was deferred to give time for discussion with committees and members of the community. That's what openness and transparency is all about. And it's been a very difficult time, with councillors and the community often kept in the dark. Rumours keep circulating. A good example is today's minute stating that the master plan was resolved by council to be of greater importance than the local strategic planning statement. Mr. Hallman over there will confirm that one of the first things I and several other councillors did when we met with the consultants on the 4th of December 2019 was ask for a copy of the brief for that consultancy. And after another 2 months of not seeing the brief, I submitted a notice of motion to the February council meeting stating that councillors are advised in writing about and able to inspect on request all terms of references and briefs for consultancies where the proposed expenditure is over $50,000, including consultancies where contracts have already been signed. That was a discrete reference to the master plan, because we still hadn't seen the brief in February. So it's hardly credible that councillors would resolve that the master plan would be more important than our statutory requirements to produce a local strategic planning statement when we hadn't even seen the brief for the master plan. Not getting the information we needed to do our job ultimately led to the court case and the suspensions of councillors. So advisory committees are of paramount importance in providing effective and knowledgeable feedback on council's activities. So if we need a review, yes, let's have it. But please don't preempt its findings by disbanding all current committees. Let them do their valuable work until the results of the review are known and any recommendations have been subject to full public consultation. Local democracy is for local people. That is the way it should work. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Ms. Koala, speaking in relation to the same item, and also the item 16.2, the Environmental Sustainability Advisory Committee meeting of the 6th of October. Thank you.
Thank you. So my name is Annette Killar, and I speak as co-chair of the Climate Emergency Working Group, CEWG, and which is of the Environmental Sustainability Advisory Committee, the ESAC. And for the items 9.8 and 16.2. As some background, can you still hear me if I do this? I would also like to reference 16.2 from the Ordinary Council meeting of the 10th of August 2020, where the Administrator resolved numerous recommendations that supported and commended the work of the CEWG in producing a professionally regarded report, a framework for climate action, and then facilitated movement forward in action, particularly through the resolution that 2 nominees from the CEWG meet with Council staff and undertake detailed analysis of that report to determine how some of the actions and recommendations could be undertaken through Council initiatives in alignment to the Community Strategic Plan, the CSP, the operational plan, and the $60,000 budget allocation that had come out of the CE.
Excuse me, can I just ask you, I'm not going to have a timer on you, just slow down.
Oh, sure, okay. Yeah. So the $60,000 budget allocation that was an outcome of the work of the CEWG with the staff. So my story here, and the point I want to get across, is that amidst other areas of dysfunction, the work of the CEWG has been a success amidst difficult circumstances, and that the traction and partnership that has most recently been enabled to be developed with council staff should be supported. A review of committees makes sense amongst the other reviews that are occurring, and the goal of the consultation to ensure that the value of local knowledge and expertise is supported, I value. With respect to the aim of focusing valuable volunteer efforts to better align with the CSP and operational decision-making, the work of the CEWG has to a large part been very cognizant of that and many other relevant government documents, and so has already been demonstrating its capacity to do that. It is 1 year and 2 days from the Gosper Mountain megafire, the beginning of that, the lightning strike that began that largest forest fire on record in this country, raging for almost 80 days and burning over 1 million hectares of land in New South Wales. And that summer, last summer, that we all experienced last year, leave no doubt that we need to do some serious rethinking. Also, 1 year and 5 days ago, Armidale Regional Council unanimously declared a climate emergency. And it was a result of this resolution that the CEWG was formed to prepare the now completed report I've referred to for input to the Council and the community on current initiatives and additional future action that can be taken, short, medium, and long term, to reduce greenhouse emissions, adapt to current and anticipated climate change impacts, and reduce atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases. So in this context, we hope that the review of committees and the deferral of meetings does not imply the deferral of those actions of select members already in train with council staff, as this would stymie not only a lot of good work, but would not be representative of the community's concerns across and surrounding climate action. As such, I would like to just support a number of recommendations that are made in the ESAC minutes and hope that the administrator will resolve to support them. I note that for the minutes, so the business papers, in the committees section of the business papers, the words "for decision" do not appear, and so it just wasn't clear whether that meant they weren't going to be up for decision. I do hope that they are. So with respect to recommendation A, that the final version of the EcoArc be put up on the council website, please be approved as its communications and requires no further committee input. With respect to B and C, which I won't read out because you can probably read them if you can access them, this is about, again, facilitating members of ESAC and CEWG to work through the EcoArc and align it in terms of what's been done and what hasn't been done, alignment with the community strategic plan, and also built into that aligning with the framework for climate action, which has implicitly been acknowledged to be quite important. So that be approved and considered as a special case in this review of committees, that it continue to be actioned and facilitated, perhaps by a special meeting with the new Acting Director, Organisational and Corporate Services, Ms. Marissa Ragamolera, who I believe has taken over the line from Leah. The EcoArc was adopted December 2019 and does need to be actioned as per the CSP, and relevant actions from the report, as I said, rather than wait for another after this review, which purportedly seems will not be put forward until February next year. With respect to F, that the Climate Emergency Working Group's Framework for Climate Action report be loaded to the Council website, be approved as it signals Council's approval of the report and it facilitates its distribution throughout the community. The report is about actions for not just Council, but also the community, and allows the conversation and community engagement on climate change to continue, supporting the CEWG's terms of reference to engage the community and stakeholders to develop the report ongoing. G just follows on from F. It's again communications, and it's another mini report that the CEWG did, or members of that did, and it highlights many of the climate actions that Council has already addressed or is addressing. And again, very important for the community's knowledge. And then H, that another meeting with 2 representatives from the CEWG and Council staff be held, and that alignment with the CSP is evidenced and articulated with any funding needing to go to unfunded items within the CSP. Now that also probably sounds like a bunch of, anyway, we hope that that would be approved as it follows from the August resolution and the budget determination of the 60,000, and supports the in-train Council staff engagement and the significance of the action on climate change that has already been discussed. So one final comment, and that's with respect to the idea of a new normal, the idea of resetting, the idea of how we as a community respond to our current unprecedented circumstances and the current schedule of Council meetings. I believe to hold the first Council meeting 2021 in February, as has been the tradition, is too late in the current circumstances. With COVID, the UNE restructure, the Council restructure, and requirements for economic and environmental reset, this date does not adequately address the urgency with which we need as a community, the urgency that we need, and the community and council connection and direction that needs to be facilitated. So I would recommend that council consider a new resolution to bring the first ordinary meeting of council in 2021 to the end of January, and in this context also bring forward the completion date for the review of committees by David Rayner, as well as any other priority actions to this same date. Thank you for your attention and consideration today.
Before you go, can I ask you a question? In relation to item H, I understood that a further meeting had been held and there was agreement on the 60,000.
My understanding is we weren't clear on that. So there was another meeting held, but...
That's 3 meetings now.
Yes. So
not the one we said we were going to have.
That is correct.
I was advised today that another meeting had been held and there was agreement.
We just haven't heard back whether that what we came up with was approved or not.
Oh, okay. So that has to, in effect, go to council for approval.
No,
I don't believe it has.
No,
it has to, because we had agreement that the 2 and the 2 would come to an agreement how the 60 would be spent, so long as the 60 was spent on environmental matters that were unfunded but in the CSP.
That particular piece of information about the unfunded only came at the very last ESAC meeting. So the prior 2 meetings that the 2 members of staff had with council staff were not informed by that particular piece of information. So the work that was done on the 9 priority items that was in our report that we were asked to identify what areas to identify. That was discussed with council staff. It was looking like those 3 different area projects were fine. When that was then put to you, I believe, on the day of the ESAC meeting, you then gave the information that no, it needed to come from unfunded areas from the CSP.
No,
that piece of information, what the staff themselves at that meeting weren't clear on, and they said they had to come back to us. So then there was another meeting, which Helen Webb and Mihail Halpern had with Stuart McRae, I believe. And there was a re-decision, a re-look at everything, and they came up with an idea, but it wasn't clear that that was going to be taken forward. Okay. And they haven't had that response from that staff yet. So.
Be that as it may, I thought I was pretty clear at the meeting I attended that as an interim administrator, I wouldn't be plucking ideas from the sky. I would be ensuring that things that the elected body had put into their community strategic plan that were unfunded would be the priority. Now, are we there yet with the 60,000, or are you just not sure?
Well, when you say are we there yet, we have put forward ideas, the 2 have put forward things that are within the community strategic plan. Some of them were already funded.
No, yeah. Oh, look, I'm happy to
so when it comes to
meet with you, Ms. Webb, and let's sort this out once and for all. But it's only going to be 60,000 for unfunded items of environmental nature that you feel are a priority in the community strategic plan. So if we could meet pretty quickly about that to put this behind us, because I'm just concerned about the resource that gets eaten in this place. From the administration in servicing all these things. So I'm more than happy to do it myself without the staff and just you 2 ladies.
Fantastic.
Okay?
Okay.
Done.
Thank you.
Next is Mr. Davis speaking on 11.14, the DA for the storage.
My name is Peter Davis and I am the State Manager of the Costa Tomato Exchange business located in Guyra. I also have in attendance with me Mr. Matt Ferris, at the back of the room, who is the Senior Civil Engineer at Kelly Covey Group and who prepared the water management plan contained in the development application. Mr. Ferris is available to answer any questions from Council about the plan and the modelling that was done as to our water requirements. I'd like to thank the Council for the opportunity to speak to our Costa's development application. Our glasshouse at 4774 New England Highway in Falconer became operational in 2015, and the site's operations were designed to be water self-sufficient, meaning that it has a closed loop water cycle and the only mains town water it uses is for staff amenities. To highlight the water use efficiency of the glasshouse grown tomatoes compared to field crops, it takes on average of 216 litres of water to produce 1 kilogram of field crop in Bundaberg, Queensland, compared to approximately 29 litres to produce 1 kilogram of crop in Costa's Guyra tomato glasshouses. Costa is currently in the process of building an additional 10 hectares on the Falconer site, and once completed this will generate an additional 160 jobs, bringing the entire workforce in Guyra to circa 900. This equates to 600 FTE positions. The total capital expenditure on this project is circa 80 million, and combined with the expenditure on establishing our existing 30 hectares of glasshouse at Guyra will mean that over the last 15 years, Costa has spent circa 180 million on establishing our glasshouse tomato business in Guyra. As we all know, 2019 was the worst drought on record for Guyra, and this presented significant challenges for our entire community. Costa fully recognises the risks associated with drought and climate change and the need to ensure we responsibly invest in infrastructure to deal with such risks. The objective is to establish the minimum storage capacity needed to maintain operational requirements in the event that only 50% of average rainfall is available in a given year. The key water supply types underpinning this are rainwater, which is captured on the glasshouse and building roofs and stored in the freshwater dam; surface water, which is captured from the designated hard stands in and around the site buildings and from the catchment zone; bore water, which is extracted groundwater; and recycled drain water, which is captured from the system within the glasshouses. And although this is not a requirement of the development application, we have also recognised the importance of preventing and at least minimising water evaporation in the dams. To this end, we will be covering both the new and the existing dams to reduce the incidence of water losses through evaporation. Modelling undertaken indicates that covering each of the water storages to prevent evaporation losses will have significant positive effects on the water security. I can advise comparisons between the existing water management strategy and the proposed strategy indicate that the proposed measures will considerably improve the confidence levels of continued water supply and reduce the reliance on groundwater. I would also like to draw to the Council's attention the fact that our bore water usage on the Falconer site, having increased in 2019 as a result of the drought, has now reduced to a level below that which was extracted in 2017. Indeed, for the 5 years that the Falconer site has been operating, there have been 2 full years where Costa has not extracted any bore water. Costa also takes its responsibilities to be a good corporate citizen seriously, and we're acutely aware of the need to keep the community informed of our plans and also to address any concerns they may have about the operation and the future investment plans. With this firmly in mind, Costa engaged Susan Sims, Principal of Wixom Consulting, to conduct a community information session in Guyra. A total of 7 separate sessions involving 11 people were held in Guyra over 2 days. Susan completed a report which I believe has been provided to the Council. Common themes covered were around local assumptions and some hearsay, with attendees commenting they were reassured by the answers given during the sessions and felt more opportunities to hear direct from Costa staff, such as a site open day, would be beneficial to the community. Identification of the allowed harvestable rights, volume of the roof area, rainwater capture and recycling rates were also of interest to the attendees. Details of the groundwater bore licence, historical usage and treatment of the bore water prior to the usage in the glasshouse were also discussed in all sessions. I wish to conclude by emphasising Costa's commitment to the objective of water sustainability, ensuring that in the future, should Guyra encounter drought conditions comparable to or worse than those in 2019, then the works proposed in this development application will ensure Falconer site is in a position to continue to be water self-sufficient. I thank the Council for its time and consideration of our development application.
please excuse a first-timer speaking in public. I honour this land I walk over and research as an upper tributary catchment researcher, observing the current into the future issues in this vital upper tributary region to the Macleay River system and to the Koala system beginning at Ben Lomond, a high altitude town of 6 tributaries serving lower level catchments that include also the Clarence and McIntyre systems. 2 major west flow inland systems, 2 major east flow hinterland systems. Add Gyra itself, where a rare upland wetland is under threat from the very same issue of groundwater extraction. The 50 megalitre dam that Costa is asking for approval, I fully approve. I have no issue with Enterprise trying to create a sustainable way of sourcing their high water need using surface water capture. And I welcome this into this area. What I do oppose is the 40 megalitre dam from extracted groundwater source of 1 bore or more on site, positioned at the top of the Garra tributary catchment that feeds into the Garra River Malpass Dam water supply catchment. I add a significant issue is the consultancy reports that were completed in 2018. Mostly, a brief amendment was included to suggest the impact of the 2019 into 2020 drought. It happens to be the worst drought ever in the entire history of this region, which is still under the same similar style of management that remove vital high altitude forests, drain vital upland wetlands, and the low sloping floodplain, low sloping floodplain type of upland wetlands that exist within the 10-kilometre radius zone of biodiversity impact. These management styles now include bores on the increase. Since 2019, there have been significant increases in the number of bores drilled into this vital upper tributary catchment landform. There's no mention in this application of the search bore issue in Gyra, also wanting to extract groundwater from this vital region. Deep aquifer groundwater extraction will threaten a groundwater-dependent ecosystem, the Mother of Ducks Lagoon, and the surrounding catchments. Note that Malpass Dam is served by Mother of Ducks Lagoon and the very same upper Garra River tributaries that this northern tomato farm are positioned, where they are asking for the huge degree of extraction to fill a 40 megalitre dam. That sort of dam is unheard of in this region, which is a grazier dominant region. There's also no mention of a protected groundwater dependent ecosystem in the Mother of Ducks which is within 8-kilometre radius of this particular site. I do note that my 1-hour session with Costa regarding this issue was the acceptance of bore water extraction as everyone's doing it, why can't we sort of attitude, because the research is completely unavailable in Australia as to impact. It is quite clearly obvious groundwater extraction in excess is impacting the Murray-Darling Basin system, where locals are, similar to myself, pleading for this type of groundwater access to stop, and where impact is not researched. I must add that in January, 1st of January, when Costa Group began extracting from the Izzard Park bore site for 36 days at a rate of 300,000 litres per day, at a bore site that still has not had access approval by the NRA body, that no monitoring was even considered a need after that level of extraction in a completely new site, in terms of, if we have to understand, the land has pathways, has networks in place that have been in place for millennia. We think we can come along and drill a bore, shallow, deep, whatever, and say there won't be any impact. What I see is a lowering of the groundwater tables, which of course creates drought issues that are on the increase. And to not redo this DA application in entirety after the worst ever drought experienced in history in the entire state of New South Wales and in this region is to say, what are we doing to this land when we are unaware of the impact of the 2019 into 2020 drought on our wildlife and their habitat. I do ask the audience to notice the the bare tree forest ridges, high ridges, south of Malpass Dam, along the highway. It is quite clear the drought has impacted habitat of forest kind, which would of course contain wildlife. We have zero concern for impact on wildlife at all. I would like the audience to read Ian Reeves' excellent report on the region. His comments regarding this application, I will mention: bore depth increasing since 1980, suggesting falling groundwater levels in recent times, at increase in bores since 2014 into 2020, licensed or not. Numbers not known to this time. Impact not known to this time. Impact not even begun to be researched or monitored. The limit of extraction, how are we assessing this in this upper tributary region of vital need to lower downstream and lower level catchments? This area was once wetland prevalent. Note, Mother of Ducks Lagoon was a lake prior to 1902. She's nowhere near that now. Why are we not considering changing our land management to actually create a more biodiverse landscape which embraces wildlife in our region and considers them vital parts of our lives? I will add also, this is very disjointed, I'm sorry, I'm not, I will add my disgust at the recent LSPS document. There is not one mention of the word regenerative agriculture, which I find deplorable in the world-declared climate emergency time of absolute needed change. I also add Australia is non-glacial fed. It is a non-glacial catchment system. We are operating using Northern Hemisphere management still. We have no awareness that the last, even the snowfall, the last deep snowfall was back in 1984. That's our glacial-fed catchment supply at the top of the range of the Great Dividing Range, which is this region. This region is supposed to serve all the lower catchments around itself, right down into the basin inland, the hot basin inland, and into the hinterland on the coast. And our management to this day shows no recognition. We are compromising it every single time we choose now to go down under. Down under. I am very concerned about the future of Australia, let alone this vital upper tributary region. I'm very concerned about a rare upland wetland, not only under threat from the search bores that are completely unresearched in terms of ecological significance, where one brief, these are always brief, consultancy report suggests there are no groundwater dependent ecosystems in the search area, and that is completely false, and I will be trying to find someone to hear this issue. Oh, I'm dismayed. Now, the other issue is there's already issues occurring in this catchment that are obvious. I refer to a report back in October 2017 presented to this council, which forced the Malpass pipeline into existence. Instead of recognising maybe we need to change our land management whereby we actually care for our catchments rather than overexploit them. I also add that the 2019 into 2020 drought exposed the high excess water usage of this hydroponic company, where an eastern farm is, I say, and I do say, unsustainable in its water usage. And I add, we are not even considering the doubling of size of this enterprise in the northern site, where they are now asking for a 40 megalitre dam from extracted groundwater reserves on the upper catchment to Malpass Dam and surrounding catchments that include the Aberfoyle. I also research and note is needing further research of UNE nature, University of New England, University kind. The Aberfoyle is a catchment running parallel to the Ryanda-Garra system, and the lagoon, the very large lagoon on the upper areas of this catchment has dried out twice. The farmer says in his lifetime, when he was a child, the Aberfoyle flowed all the time, and he said it hasn't done that for a long, long time. We are not including the local farmers as consultants. I feel the local voice is needing to be heard. We must start considering consultancy with locals. They are the ones living on the land. They notice change daily, year by year. The generational farmer that lives below this, the northern tomato farm, has been ignored for years. He's been saying there's been impact, not heard. It's deplorable treatment of local people, generational farmers who know the land far better than people who live in offices, who research living in an office, not even remotely connected to the land they are consulting over. I add the Koala Assessment impact included in this.
Excuse me, Mr. Cairns, you've had a pretty fair go. Could you start and wind up if you don't mind?
Okay. It was a 3-day consultancy, 1 day on site, back in 2013, when a biodiversity radius range is within 10 kilometres. There are koala present in this area. There are also vulnerable species such as greater glider, powerful owl, spotted quoll, now under threat from this kind of groundwater extraction. I vehemently oppose the 40 megalitre dam of imported groundwater extraction nature, and I do add the consultant report mentions neighbours. There's no mention of any of these sites in a report that have been consulted upon or researched. Oh, that is all. Sorry.
Okay, look, obviously you're quite passionate about the matter, but thanks for your presentation. Mr. Taylor, talking in relation to item 11.15, the intensive animal husbandry application.
There's a phone here. Someone's phone. Yep. Thank you very much. I'm Peter Taylor, obviously the prime author of the Statement of Environmental Effects and the other documents submitted with this application on behalf of the applicant, Tenterton Station. Just a little bit of background. I've been working as a consultant for some 30 odd years, and during that period probably dealt with many feedlots. In the past 12 to 18 months, we've probably had 25 new feedlot sites on our books within the northwest region. As a response to extended drought, that a lot of graziers who have really had to move to what planning rules recall as a containment yard, which is basically allowing them to feed cattle in a feedlot arrangement for an extended period because they don't have any grass. As a result of that, the last 4 years or more of drought, I believe that a lot of landowners, some are still continuing in that containment yard arrangement, but others have realised that that they should get an approval for the feedlot and go through the accreditation system. Number one, so that they know that they're doing everything right. Number two, so that they can actually sell the cattle for a little bit more, or $1 to $2 a kilo more, and make it more profitable if that's going to continue. Feedlots are always up and down. So, a lot of the feedlots are empty at the moment, and I believe this one will be the same, that it'll be market driven. It won't be run at 999 head every day. This feedlot in particular, this application is for both sheep and cattle, primarily cattle, but the planning regulations allow for the equivalent of about 4 sheep per 1 head of cattle in New South Wales. And I'll probably just correct the board up there that you've got 999 SCU, which is standard cattle units. New South Wales doesn't have that. One beast is one beast. That's from Queensland, which I actually discussed because the standard beast is about 600 kilos, and it's slightly different for New South Wales. My experience with this site in particular goes back a number of years when the Guyra Shire engaged my services as an environmental scientist to assess a previous application for a sheep feedlot on the adjoining property, which is now part of the Tenderton aggregation. I believe it was either a 2,000 or 4,000 head feedlot for sheep. After investigation, my recommendation to council was to not approve that site, that sheep feedlot site, because it had issues, and those issues have been highly identified by the adjoining landowners in this case, which was basically pollution of the adjoining creek system via the spring water, which this sheep feedlot, which I didn't recommend to proceed, and it hasn't proceeded, was the property owner has now moved on, I believe. So some years later, being last year, the applicant engagement services to look at a new site on the property. This new site, we've done a full investigation, both from an engineering perspective of design, an environmental perspective of what's on the site, what we're going to impact, from environmental issues. As then we started to look at the community issues, infrastructure issues, as in what roads are available, and other things like that. I'll probably go to, this application has been drawn out a little bit, but due to the drought more than anything else, I believe. But the design of the feedlot has been, council have obviously passed that through the New South Wales EPA, which are the administering authority for the relevant feedlot guidelines. To my knowledge, the EPA were happy with the design because it met the requirements, which are basically mathematics as far as the catchment or runoff of the site, pond sizes for effluent management, etc. Council here have imposed an issue of a 200 metre buffer off the local watercourses. So that resulted in a redesign to move away from the watercourse, which was quite achievable. So our additional information report resulted in some changes to the layout of the feedlot, so we could establish that 200 metre buffer. Our irrigation area for effluent was outside of that buffer, and the mass burial pit is also outside of that buffer. So those numbers were relatively straightforward. Probably one of the other issues that are critical to feedlots is the odour issue. Most feedlots, regardless of whether they're small or large, are anticipated by all the neighbouring residents to have an odour issue. I guess to settle that issue, that started with the Queensland DPI, but it's gone on to the New South Wales EPA and now the Meat and Livestock Authority, have a set of guidelines, have a set of standards for what's virtually a first stage assessment of odour, which is calculating the factors such as the topography, the number of head, the type of management, the community, the receptors. Unfortunately, they say all us rural people can put up with the smell a little bit more than townspeople. But those numbers were run through, which is a standard guideline, which is open to the public to look at, came up with a clear pass, meaning that in this particular case, the buffer zone between the proposed feedlot and the closest receptor was acceptable, and it did not trigger a requirement for more detailed odour assessment, which the detailed odour assessment would probably refine that buffer down even more, even less. And in many occasions, I probably don't agree with there's just too many numbers in going into complex odour modelling. The soils on site, we've got plenty of suitable heavy clay material. So if we do encounter any fractured rock that may result in some effluent or some just general runoff within the site entering the local spring system, we can seal that off. So we would avoid the issues that have been highlighted by the neighbouring property. I'm not sure whether they're here or not, but there was a lot of E. coli problems, and problems to the point where the creek had become the water quality was horrendous by the look of it, and it was affecting cattle as well as people. The other issue that feedlots run into in small rural areas is relates to traffic. Now, based on this feedlot site and our numbers on worst case situation where you've got 100% occupancy and all the feed is grown off farm, all cattle come from off farm, that 1,000 head feedlot will generally generate a single truck movement, one truck to and from the feedlot about every second day. Now, in this particular case, whether it's one truck or 20 trucks, issues such as the school bus need to be considered, and I believe the applicants have spoken to the school bus drivers as of today and on previous occasions, and they're acceptable to the proposal, and generally the trucks will stay away from school bus hours, or there's a radio communication if that's required. But I think as far as the feedlot goes, you generally have a management plan in place. If it's something like that becomes an issue, you do something about it. You either have a limited number of truck drivers that are aware of the issue, aware of the road, where there's narrow, where it's a school bus, and just avoid it, rather than the neighbours coming to council and reporting the problem or a traffic accident happening. The road seems to be satisfactory for B doubles, as far as I'm aware, but obviously caution in some areas. Probably according to my experience, over 30 years of experience with feedlots, the feedlot attendant can be built to meet the feedlot guidelines and to be able to operate as a Class 1 or Class A feedlot, which is basically at a higher level of management. The government doesn't accept any lower class than that as of many years ago. The buffer distances between the feedlot site and the neighbours is sufficient. In fact, it's probably more than double what the odour assessment calculations were. Visually, the feedlot is relatively hidden from most adjoining landowners. I think the closest neighbour that would be able to see the site is several kilometres from the area. We've also reviewed council's proposal conditions of approval. They're accepted by the applicant. That they have been discussed, and there's no particular matters raised there. The majority of the conditions relate to management and recording of what happens at the feedlot, and also critically, if there's a complaint that's registered, and that's something's done about it. Other issues, difficult issues that were raised in the process of this community consultation. I believe the applicant had the landowners and council on the property. The Q fever issue, very difficult one in the cattle and the animal industry itself, as in its the Q fever is through animals, cattle, sheep, and native animals. Obviously, I believe if you're over 15, you can be vaccinated. Under 15, you can't, so that becomes an issue with children. The applicant has young children, and also Jane is actually a vet, so that helps quite a lot on the site, and is obviously fully aware of the queue fever issue. To me, it hasn't, my experience 30 years in the feedlot, it hasn't been a problem with neighbours, but it's one of those issues that research hasn't really got there yet to give a solid answer to say yes or no. I believe there's been some rare instances, and then they've tracked it back and it was unrelated to the actual feedlot itself. So I thank council for their time, and hopefully that will accept that approval if that can be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms Hodgkins? Sorry, Mr.
I'm not Emma, but if council's happy, I'll speak first, if that's okay. Dear Mr May, I address council today regarding the feedlot development application. Emma and I speak on behalf of the adjoining landholders downstream of Tennyson Station, notably Koala Daly Cornelli and Josh Daly at Wilford, Lexi Nielsen and family at Newenden, Murray Nielsen and family at Winterville, the Baxter family at Baluke, the Sanderson family at Somerset, and of course my own family at West Wilford. A letter emailed on Monday the 26th of May to Mr Viv May and his associates John Rayner, John Goodall and Kate Blackwell raised several concerns in regards to the recommended approval of this feedlot development application. The information provided outlined some obvious non-compliances with Armidale Regional Council policies and procedures, as questions were raised in regards to compliance with the Guyra Local Environmental Plan of 2012 and the State Planning Policy of 2019. In addition to this, issues were highlighted as to the non-compliance with the Department of Primary Industry guidelines as to the standards for beef cattle feedlots. In light of this information, we ask Council to engage an independent specialist to review the existing DA application to provide a non-biased report for Council prior to review. We also request that an independent land use conflict risk assessment be undertaken, with the outcomes of which to be considered as per the DPI recommendations. Our advice to this point is that we believe that Armidale Regional Council potentially has a conflict of interest in relation to the current feedlot development application. As previously mentioned by Peter a minute ago, in 2015, Council engaged SMK consultants to independently assess the previous feedlot application on behalf of Council. Their report, in conjunction with the Manager of Planning of Council, refused the previous development application. How can Council now objectively assess information that has been provided by SMK consultants on behalf of the applicant? SMK consultants are clearly not impartial and independent of the process. Their advice could not be legally accepted by Council without a suitably qualified peer review from a specialist in the relative fields relating to this application, as was done in 2015. Please note, no written advice has been provided to adjoining landholders, Mr Murray Nielsen from Winterville and Miss Lexi Nielsen of Newenden, in relation to this meeting today, and possibly others, both of whom are submitters of submissions. Lexi Nielsen and Koala Daly, the closest neighbours and sensitive receptors, have never received notification of the original development application by Council. Council has not fully executed its duties according to the Guyra Developmental Control Plan 2012, outlined in pages 99 to 101. We, as a community, have not had enough time to engage a specialist consultant to review the advice put forward by Council in relation to this recent matter. We have no confidence that the new advice provided by the applicant has correctly addressed our concerns. Please note, as mentioned before, the water pollution is a big concern for us. If you refer to the previous advice provided in our original submission, we have already been polluted by an upstream feedlot, and we have the data and evidence to support this. It is most important to us that the water design calculations are undertaken to the utmost detail to ensure the safety of our livelihoods and our agricultural operations. We are yet to see any detailed topographical drawings of the site, and therefore all calculations of the surface water design are based on rough and inaccurate calculations. Without detailed drawings, there is no way to confirm if the calculations provided are relevant to the design provided. The drawing provided in the SEE to date clearly notes they are preliminary only. Before Council could consider this type of land use in any way feasible, wouldn't it condition that the feedlot must comply with national feedlot guidelines and be accredited at all times in accordance with this scheme, including relevant audits and inspections by the relevant authorities and council? With rainfall above 750 millimetres annually, each head of cattle are required to have the space of 16 metres squared as per the DPI guidelines. The 8 pens proposed are to be 40 metres by 40 metres, a total of 12,800 metres squared. These numbers and measurements indicate the proposed site would accommodate 800 head in the amended plan, not 999. Where will the additional 200 head be located, or will they be crowded into the proposed design, therefore not meeting industry standards? If done correctly, the minimum footprint for 999 head in the area would need to be 15,984 metres squared to meet DPI guidelines. The proposed development application footprint is therefore 20% smaller than the minimum DPI requirement. The recently approved World Ark Stock Containment Area near Ben Lomond contains a footprint area of 18,000 square metres for 999 head. And the recently rejected feedlot near Glen Innes had a footprint of 20,000 square metres for 999 head. Thank you. I'll allow Emma to continue.
Just before you go, I just want to confirm, ask the Manager of Development, is it council policy where residents make objection to development applications to inform the objectors that the matter is coming to council?
Yes, it is, Mr. Administrator. It is council policy.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yep.
Following on incorrect pen sizes, the proposed footprint calculations would need to be substantially increased to meet minimum DPI guidelines. This would significantly increase the applicant's measurements required for correct calculations on their feedlot footprint. This involves increasing pen floor size, increasing drainage system required, increasing effluent runoff calculations, requiring increased capacity for sedimentation and holding ponds, and therefore increasing their sizes. Once all these calculations and holding pond sedimentation ponds are adjusted to correct sizes to meet the minimum DPI guidelines, we expect that then they would encroach on the 200 metre buffer zone, as the footprint for the feedlot development would be greatly much larger. Therefore, all calculations for the DA would need to be adjusted to meet industry standards, impacting on the entire proposal. Applicants have also suggested that the pen cleaning will occur at the maximum timeframe allowable, 13 weeks, while cramming an additional 200 head into this space. Drainage systems do not meet DPI guidelines. Applicants have stated that the drain should be 1 metre wide with a runoff coefficient of 0.4. DPI guidelines for beef cattle feedlots use runoff coefficient of 0.8. This therefore doubles the size of the drains required, which more than doubles the area required. The drainage required to meet DPI guidelines exponentially increases in comparison to the calculations provided to Council from SMK consultants in their most recent additional information. Higher rainfall will negatively affect effluent runoff. Only one sediment holding tank pond has been proposed. There should be a minimum of 2, as the second should be needed when each pond is cleaned out. We believe holding capacity calculations are incorrect, as the runoff coefficient of 0.8 should be used, and the current proposed system will fail. Tennyson area has repeated rainfall events, such as over the last few days, which would not allow sufficient time for the sedimentation to settle. This would flow through to the holding pond, and the holding pond would overflow, therefore contaminating local water supply. This area is also prone to storms, resulting in storm influx water. This would not be contained in the proposed system ponds. Given our high rainfall, the sedimentation ponds would be inadequate in a period of continual rainfall events. Sediment ponds also need to settle over 1 month for the sediment to fall to the bottom of the pond. If high rainfall periods persist, this would create a constant disturbance and agitation in the ponds, therefore not allowing the sedimentation process to occur effectively, resulting in sedimentation not being captured and then flowing unfiltered into our water systems, particularly if the ponds are shallow. Given our rainfall is 1,100 millimetres a year, the opportunities to irrigate are greatly reduced. If irrigation occurs on already saturated soils, runoff is increased into our waterways. Regarding the soil, the DA states that the soil type is clay. Have soil tests been provided to Council to prove this? We ask where the basis of the applicant's information is coming from. Again, the Well-Dark Stock Containment Area provided 16 independent soil analysis results from across their site. The Department of Urban Affairs and Planning states that the impact guidelines state other appropriate sites should be investigated before signing off on a DA. We ask if this has been conducted by Council. Residents are all concerned about the increased airborne and environmental risks associated with intensive livestock production, not only Q fever, but anthrax, brucellosis, leptospirosis, dust allergies, gastroenteritis, ringworm, E. coli infection and Giardia infection. The Tenterden Valley encompasses Georges Creek, Kangaroo Creek and numerous underground aquifers. The Tenterden Valley has a rich ecosystem with many unique inhabitants, including several bird species, various aquatic life and the iconic platypus and the endangered Bell's turtles. Sadly, inevitable contamination of the Tenterden Valley water systems by this proposed feedlot will result in detrimental outcome to this unique environment and the inhabitants within it. Please note that DPI don't recommend feedlots in areas of rainfall over 750 millimetres per annum. Keeping this in mind, the annual Tenterden area rainfall is 1,100 millimetres, much greater than 750. So if approved, Armidale Council would be approving outside industry guidelines. We would refer Council to the parish maps showing marsh areas on Tenterden aggregation both sides of the Morden Dams Road. Operation Environmental Management Plan. Who will oversee and enforce these procedures and limits are adhered to? In summary, we request that this DA application be rejected. If not rejected outright, we ask that the application be withdrawn until Council can have clear, independent, specialist assessment reports completed, which address all of the concerns raised above. This would enable Council to make an unbiased, informed decision regarding this at DA prior to approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thank all those people who have made contributions tonight for or against items on the business paper. The council does have time limits, which, you know, I think, well, I don't agree with time limits if residents want to make submissions. So I've been quite generous in the time allocated to people, but I think that's, in the current circumstances of the council under administration, it's appropriate. We now move to confirmation of minutes. The confirmation of the minutes of the ordinary meeting of council held on 23 December 2020. I move that the minutes as typed and circulated be confirmed or adopted and declare that carried. There is one interim administrator minute. I wrote that early so I didn't have to read it. There's enough on the business paper. It's been circulated. It relates to Armidale Plan 2040. I would move that, notwithstanding the fact that Armidale Plan 2040 has been used to inform Council's response to the local strategic planning statement, the Acting General Manager arranged for Armidale 2040 final report June 2020 to be placed on public exhibition for 42 days for community consultation to inform staff in the preparation of the report on the actions that deliver the objectives of the community strategic plan. I would declare that carried. We now move on to business generally. The first item is 9.1. Mr. General Manager. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. This report regards membership fees to the New England Joint Organisation.
Thank you. I would move the recommendation outlined on page 7 of the business papers, item 9.1, and declare it carried. Item 9.2.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. This report proposes some amendments to the Model Code of Conduct across 3 key areas and the revocation of a social media policy now that it's covered in the Model Code.
Thank you. In relation to item 9.2 on page 9 of the business paper, I would move the recommendation as outlined in A and B and declare it carried. Item 9.3, revised policy for pathway name and address.
Thank you, Mr. Interim Administrator. This is a report to place the name and address policy on public exhibition, seeking comments from the public in how we deal with their personal information in our databases.
Thank you. In relation to item 9.3 on page 11 of the business paper, I'd move the recommendation A and B and declare that carried. Residents will probably get sick of the number of policies that will be coming up to council in the coming months. Unfortunately, it didn't happen during the last term of administration when it should have. So we're harmonising policies between Armidale and Armidale Numeric and Guyra Shire at the moment, and there's a lot of staff time being invested in this behind the scenes, and the objective will be to have all of these policies up on the web so residents are clear and staff are clear on the policies of the council. Next item is item 9.4, the 2020 Christmas and New Year closure dates of the council.
This item seeks endorsement of the 2020 Christmas and New Year close down period.
Thank you very much. In relation to item 9.4 on page 12 of the business paper, I would move the recommendation of the officer and declare that carried. The next item is item 9.5 on page 13 of the business paper.
Mr. Interim Administrator, thank you. This report updates council and the community on the processes and the actions that are underway to improve governance arrangements within this organisation. Over time and through people leaving, there's been a lack of focus and inadequate knowledge of good governance requirements. It's certainly not the fault of the current council staff. Many are new to local government and have had no relevant governance experience. But I must say they have embraced the recommendations that have come from this review, and they are implementing those with enthusiasm, and I appreciate your advice to the community, Mr. Interim Administrator, on the number of policies that will be coming through for community consultation. We are very aware that the organisation does need to be open and transparent, and that's why all of those reviews will be going out for consultation in the community. The report also formally asks that we thank Mr. Hopwood and Ms. Charlton, who were seconded by this council from Wollongong and Willoughby councils to assist with this review, and also they are providing assistance remotely at the moment to help our staff.
Thank you. General Manager, this is a damning report in relation to the administration of the council, and I would encourage people who are interested in the reasons why, one of the reasons why I've recommended there be a public inquiry into this council, read this report. In relation to item 9.5 on page 30 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation A, B, C, D and add an E that Council forward a copy of the independent review of governance arrangements and the Acting General Manager's report and recommendations to the Office of Local Government. I declare that carried. Next item is 9.6 on page 20 of the business paper.
The purpose of this report is to recommend that the draft risk management policy is placed on public exhibition and that a further report is returned to Council at the conclusion of that exhibition period.
Thanks very much for that. In relation to item 9.6 on page 20 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation A and B and declare it carried. Item 9.7 on page 22 of the business paper.
Thank you. As noted earlier, there is an extensive review of all of Council's policy, and this report recommends the adoption of a policy framework to achieve consistency in the development and review of policies and ensure that all legal obligations are met without duplication of legislation and regulations to ensure openness and transparency.
Thank you very much. In relation to item 9.7 on page 22 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation and declare it carried. Item 9.8, review of Council's committee structure.
This report acknowledges the contribution that's been made by many residents in participating in Council's committees. It also notes there is a review of committees underway and that many people that have been involved in the current and past committees and the community generally have their opportunity to have their say as part of that review. It is proposed that the committee meetings be deferred until such time as the Council has considered the review. The recommendations will be coming to the Council at the February meeting. It will impact only 3 meetings of advisory committees and the statutory committees, the Traffic Committee and the ARIC, the Audit Committee, will not be impacted.
Thank you. I heard what Ms Robinson said about the review of the Council's committee structure. This is just another stage of it. The Council needs to respect volunteers, and there is a lot of talent in this community, and it's very important that that talent is used and respected. And the purpose of this review is not to demolish or stop that those advisory groups. It's to make sure that we're on the right track, and we won't be reinventing the wheel. There are many options out there, but the importance is we want to speak to as many community members and groups and committees as possible to inform the process, and it all takes time. In relation to item 9.8 on page 23 of the business paper, I'd move the officer's recommendation A, B, C, D and E and declare that carried. Item 9.9 on page 26 of the business paper.
The purpose of this report is to table the disclosures of pecuniary interests and other matters returns for the period 1 July 2019 to 30 June 2020.
I look forward to being able to see, like the majority or the vast majority of councils across this state, these online and updated online after every meeting to offer further transparency of this organisation. In relation to item 9.9 on page 26 of the business paper, I'd move that the officer's recommendation be adopted and declare that carried. Item 9.10 on page 27 of the business paper.
This report is to inform of the actions of regional cities of New South Wales to work with the state government in promoting regional city living and working.
I think this is a great initiative that the council has in being a part of regional cities New South Wales and in the promotion of regional city living and working. I, for one, have been impressed by this region, the amount of time I spent up here in the last few months. In relation to item 9.10 on page 27 of the business paper, I'd move that the officer's recommendation be adopted and declare that carried. Item 9.1 on page 28 of the business paper.
This report notes the minutes of the New England Joint Organisation Committee, which was held on the 29th of September. We don't entirely agree with the minutes as they are presented, but we'll address that at the next meeting.
Yeah, I see that you're not adopting them, you're receiving and noting at this stage. In relation to item 9.11 on page 28 of the business paper, I'd move the officer's recommendation be adopted and declare that carried. Item 10.1 on page 29 of the business paper.
This report informs Council of that we have been successful in obtaining funding of $1,429,701 for a range of projects as outlined in the report, and includes a work schedule for moving forward one of those projects.
Thank you. In relation to item 10.1 on page 29 of the business paper, I'd move the officer's recommendation A and B and declare that carried. Item 10.2 on page 31 of the business paper.
This report seeks Council's endorsement to submit a funding application to the Department of Regional New South Wales under the Bushfire Community Recovery and Resilience Fund for a total of $250,000 for 5 projects as outlined in the report.
I understood that there was going to be some slight alterations to this report. They're up there, are they? Yeah, the community-led grants program goes to 65,000 because further advice was that it's in lots of 5,000 as I understand it. And to just advise the community, I met with the Mayor of Bellingen yesterday in relation to the Waterfallway Tourism Recovery Campaign and had good discussions with him and the General Manager down there. There is no question that the council investing money east of Armidale at this stage where the fires had a dramatic impact is certainly a good decision. Accordingly, in relation to item 10.2 on page 31 of the business paper, I would move the recommendation as on the screen with those minor variations, and just one has been missed on number 5, federal should read national. This is, sorry? Yes, national instead of, yeah. This is something many organisations have been speaking to me about, the importance of attracting people to Armidale, whether it be sporting or cultural or whatever, for games and the flow-on effects for the economy. Declare that carried. The next one is item 10.3 on page 33 of the business paper.
Thank you, Mr. Interim Administrator. I'd just like to introduce this report. This report recommends that Council proceed to community engagement on 3 special rate variation or SRV scenarios, and also on the impacts of rates harmonisation. While these are distinct processes, it's important to the SRV process that Council explains the separate impact of each of these processes on ratepayers. I'll just speak to the rates harmonisation first. The rates harmonisation process is a statutory process where Council's required under current legislation to merge the currently separate Armidale and Guyra Council rate structures from the 1st of July 2021. For many ratepayers, this will not result in any impact to the rates that they pay other than the application of the rate peg. But for some ratepayers, there will be impacts because the existing rating categories they are currently in are not able to be maintained under a harmonised rating structure. Council would not raise any more revenue as a result of rates harmonisation. Council has made representations to the New South Wales Government and has supported proposed legislative amendments to allow for the impacts of rates harmonisation to be introduced more gradually than what's currently required. For the purpose of the proposed community engagement process, however, we must advise the community about the impacts of rates harmonisations as it must be applied under the current legislation. If and when amended legislation is available, Council will look at how this can assist with mitigating the adverse impacts of rates harmonisation for those classes of ratepayers that are impacted. In regards to the special rate variation, this process is a critical process for Council at this time. In 2021, a temporary SRV of 10% above the rate peg, applied by the former Armidale Demerit Council over a 7-year period, will expire, and it will reduce Council's overall rate revenue by $1.5 million per annum. Failure to, at a minimum, secure the funding provided by the temporary SRV would result in Council incurring significant operating deficits, and unrestricted cash reserves would fall into an overdraft deficit position very quickly. This outcome would be financially unsustainable and would require significant cuts to services. For the community engagement process, we have modelled 3 SRV scenarios as outlined in the report and stated in the recommendation. It is important for the community to note that the recommendation being put forward today is for Council to proceed to community engagement on the SRV. A final decision on whether Council applies for an SRV will not occur until after the community engagement period has ended. In order to ensure that the information on the SRV and rates harmonisation is disseminated as widely as possible, a comprehensive community engagement plan has been developed, and we are aiming to try and cover as many aspects of the community as possible. There will be some limitations where face-to-face interactions are concerned due to the requirement to comply with the COVID-19 requirements. However, despite this challenge, we are planning to deliver as comprehensive a program as possible given the available resources. The timeframe for the community engagement is from the 2nd of November through to the 10th of December. In closing, I recommend this report and the recommendations to you, Mr. Interim Administrator, in order to ensure that Council can meet the timeframe requirements set by IPART to be able to submit an application for a special rate variation effective for the 21-22 financial year. Could I also please request that these comments be added to the minutes?
Yes, I agree with that. Can I ask just a couple of questions? In relation to rate harmonisation, is it fair to say that the biggest impact will be where there's been revaluations over which we have no control?
Not quite, no. The impact of rates harmonisation, the predominant negative impact on ratepayers will be where we've previously had 2 categories that we now have to merge into one. So the main impact there will be areas like farmland, rural residential, non-urban business.
The way I read the report was on, it was urban. The non-urban residential, particularly for Guyra, is a problem. Is that right?
Yes, under the current legislation, there's no way to distinguish non-urban residential or rural residential categories by geographic area. They must be combined. Yeah,
but for the vast majority, the overwhelming majority, there's going to be little or no difference.
Correct.
Yeah. And we're supporting the legislation that they're talking about to stage it over 3 years. Certainly. Yeah. And in relation to the special rate variation for the Armidale Demerit former residents, the 10% is built into the percentage charges you have. There's no option other than to go for the 10%.
Yeah, that's correct. So that currently forms part of our rate base. So the $1.5 million we collect from the temporary SRV is part of the overall $18.8 million in rate revenue we receive. And we have had funding from special rate variations in place for the former Armidale Demerit councils and Guyra councils for at least the last 16 years.
Do do you know why the council weren't planning for this some years ago to get the approvals in advance? We haven't been here long enough.
Probably haven't been here long enough, probably.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, it's an unfair question. But I just would have thought that normally councils who have temporary extensions, some years beforehand start to plan. So, you know, anyhow, we have to live with it. In relation to item 10.3 on page 33 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation A, B, C and D and declare that carried. And as the CFO said, this is for community consultation. Now, this is not written in blood. Item 10.4 on page 43 of the business paper.
Thank you. Council previously endorsed an interim hardship policy that was due for review at the 30th of September. The policy has been reviewed and there have been very few applications for hardship consideration on the basis of COVID-19. As a result, it's recommended that suspension of any new external debt recovery in the current policy be lifted, and the report recommends the policy be extended to the 25th of March 2021 and the revised policy wording be endorsed.
Thank you very much. In relation to item 10.4 on page 43 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation and declare that carried. And on this item, there's a preview of what business papers will look like in the future to get more accountability in this organisation. Any officer's recommendation will have to be endorsed by either a director or the general manager. Item 10.5 on page 44 of the business paper.
Thank you. This report covers a loan waiver request from the New England Regional Indoor Sports Complex, otherwise known as NERISC. Council has received a request for a write-off of a loan from NERISC by way of the Honourable Adam Marshall MP. The request has been considered and reviewed in line with previous concessions already granted to the organisation and other financial arrangements that are in place with community groups. The various options reviewed are outlined in the report, but taking all factors into consideration, including Council's own financial position, it's recommended that the request for write-off not be approved, but instead Council agree to defer the loan repayments for 2 years and also extend the overall loan term by 2 years as well.
Thank you. In relation to item 10.5 on page 44 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation A and B and declare it carried. Item 10.6 on page 46.
Thank you. This report covers a payment deferral request made by the Rams Rugby League Football Club in relation to some outstanding water charges. We have received a request from the club to defer an existing payment arrangement for these charges, and they have requested that that be extended until March 2021. It is a long outstanding arrangement, so it's outside of Council's normal payment arrangement terms. But we do recommend that the request be approved on the basis that the club's advised it's had suffered a loss of revenue due to the COVID-19 shutdown.
Thank you. In relation to item 10.6 on page 46 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation and declare it carried. Item 10.7 on page 48 of the business paper.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. This report makes a recommendation to prepare a costed proposal to deploy smart water metering across the Armidale Regional Council potable network and advise New South Wales DPIE Water it'll be seeking funding under to deploy smart water metering as a strategy to enhance town water security.
Thanks for this. This, in my view, is a great initiative, and I again remind residents of the cost of water these days. If you get therapy from watering your garden on Wednesday and Sundays between 5 and 7, it could be quite expensive therapy. So if it's been raining, don't water. Water's a valuable resource, and anything we can do to ensure that we limit its use, all the better. In relation to this item on page 10.7, I'm on page 48, 10.7 on the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation A and B, but add a new C, and that is that council delegate to the General Manager authority to accept a final scope of the project and proceed to tender. I declare that carried. Item 10.8 on page 50 of the business paper.
Mr. Interim Administrator, we'd like to have another look at this proposal, and so I would recommend that Council refer the matter back to the General Manager for a further report.
This follows the correspondence you've received. Yeah. Thank you. There's a little bit more up on the screen than what you said. So the recommendations on the screen.
Yes, the recommendation is on the screen, calling for that further report, taking into consideration Council's community recognition program policy, the decision of Council on the 24th of May 2017, the naming of roads, and the Armidale Regional Airport Industrial Subdivision naming of roads. Some of those items were taken into consideration in preparing this report. We'd just like to have another look at it in light of the submission that I've received.
Yeah, thank you. In relation to item 10.8 on page 50 of the business paper, I would move the amended recommendation of the staff on the screen there and declare that carried. Item 10.9, page 52, the Armidale Beer and Barbecue Festival.
Thank you, Interim Administrator. This proposal comes to the Council to submit an application for a limited liquor licence or a temporary special event licence for a new event, working title Beer and Barbecue Festival. This recommendation comes after consultation with the Officer of Liquor and Gaming, local law enforcement, vendors themselves, and also research into similar events held at other councils around the regions.
You're going to put your hand up to take responsibility for all of this?
That's the other recommendation, that we actually give that power to the General Manager to be able to discern who that might be.
Thanks. In relation to item 10.9 on page 52 of the business paper, I'd move the recommendation A, Officer's recommendation A and B, and declare it carried. Recommendation 10.10, item 10.10 on page 55 of the business paper.
Thank you, Mr. Interim Administrator. This report recommends Council approve the tenderers under the categories and subcategories as contained within the confidential attachment to the report to the Professional Engineering and Project Management Services panel contract for the period the 1st of October 2020 to 30 September 2023. This tender was called to replace an existing panel contract for similar services that expired in July 2020. The new tender expanded the scope of services sought, and as a result, there were a significant number of tender responses. We evaluated the tenders based on the weightings outlined in the report and did include a local supplier preference weighting. The report recommendation also provides for a 12-month extension based on satisfactory supplier performance at the end of the initial contract term.
Thank you very much. And I note that this is now not going into closed council, these matters, which is good. In relation to item 10.10 on page 55 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation A and B and declare it carried. Item 11.1, Creeklands Master Plan.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. The recommendation is that Council receive and note the submissions contained in the report. B, adopt the Creeklands Master Plan with the following amendments. 1, the option to retain the Civic Park Pond. 2, the option to retain the Labyrinth in its current location. C, at a quarterly budget review, consider the engagement of appropriately qualified consultant to review Council's 2004 ERM Australia Armidale Creeklands Environmental Management Plan, and to 1, undertake soil testing within the area covered by the Creeklands Master Plan. 2, provide an updated management plan to ensure compliance with EPA legislation. 3, to provide an updated management plan that provides WHS compliant procedures to ensure environmental and human health safeguards can be effectively implemented and managed for any works that disturb these soils, and D, endorse the proposed Stage 1 implementation plan.
I must say I was enthused to read the community responses to this. The item C, from my reading of the report, will not affect the council investing in some items in the report, so we can get a move on it. Is that right?
I don't think there's any barriers.
Thank you. In relation to item 11.1 on page 51 of the business paper, I would move A, officer's recommendation A, B, C, D, and add a number E. Note, the community priorities are to be reported to the next available council meeting. And I will declare that carried. And the reason why I've added number E is in the submissions that were made, residents prioritised quite a few matters which they thought should be happening. And I think we should be listening to what residents say. So that will come to the next meeting. Next item is 11.2 on page 62 of the business paper.
Thank you, Mr. Interim Administrator. I'd like to introduce this report to Council to formally adopt the local strategic planning statement following consultation with the community. Also noting the 0.9% long-term population growth projections recommended to be endorsed in the LSPS is in line with the New South Wales Government population projections. This projection sits within the projected growth rate, both low and high, and is used by the state government in planning for the delivery of services to our community. During the exhibition of the LSPS, Council received submissions requesting a lower population projection be adopted due to environmental sustainability impacts, in particular the need for new and upgraded infrastructure, roads, water, sewer, etc., required to support the 1% growth rate. Likewise, other submissions received requested that Council adopt a higher population target as the region needs to grow to attract new businesses, facilities and support services and the like. Council's Community Strategic Plan states the community experiences the benefits of increasing population. The New South Wales population projections for the New England North West show that only 2 centres are projected to experience positive population growth, Tamworth at 0.6 and Armidale at 0.9. All other centres are shown as experiencing population decline. The projected population for Armidale is estimated to result in an increase of 7,800 people between 2016 and 2041, from 30,300 to 38,100. The endorsement of the New South Wales population projections for Armidale, while not an ambitious target that some members of the community desired, is considered to be the precautionary approach in line with section 8.33 of the Armidale Plan 2040, which you adopted for exhibition earlier in the meeting. It should also be noted that planning priority 1B of the LSPS is to undertake integrated strategic planning to facilitate preferred development of each settlement. The New England North West Plan also, under Action 7.1, requires the development of local growth management strategies and the use of local plans to reinforce regional cities and centres as the primary location for commerce, housing, tourism, social activity and regional services. These local growth management strategies, local plans, could consider different population growth options and the potential impact on our environment and community. A short briefing paper, therefore, on the differing population rates would assist in informing future planning activities, and I recommend that we undertake that. Could I also please request that those comments I've made be included in the minutes?
Yeah, look, thank you. My comments are in relation to Armidale 2040. I think it added an unnecessary and confusing layer, and there was no brief at all from the council adopted, and the council didn't even vote the money to do it, but it happened, and it's a substantial document with a lot of community input. And in that document, the committee helped develop it, I forget what they were called, they were
Citizen panel.
the citizens panel, they were recommending an increase of between 2 and 3%. And when you have that kind of community involvement in the preparation of a document, you just can't push it to one side. And that's why I've been asking so many questions about the 0.9 and status quo versus the 2 to 3, which the community was talking about. And for residents, I understand the challenges associated with the provision of infrastructure to address that. But I think the discussion needs to start because people who have been talking to me about lost opportunities for Armidale, well, let's make sure that Armidale is equipped to ensure they don't lose opportunities, but they've got to be the right opportunities. So I would move the officer's recommendation on page 62 of the business paper, items A, B, C, D, E, and add a new F. Prepare a short discussion paper noting the advice of the Manager of Development on population growth in the Armidale Regional Council local government area, acknowledging the Armidale Plan 2040 resident input of 2 to 3% and the assumptions in the statement and comparisons with the New South Wales regional areas of relevance with a view to informing future planning activities and studies. And I declare that carried. And my intent there is to start a discussion in the community about what the expectations of this community are. And I also talk about GIRA in those discussions because there is opportunities for growth there as well. Now, move on to item 11.3 on page 66 of the business paper.
Mr Administrator, this report asks Council to endorse the redevelopment of Dumeric Dam Recreation Facility Design Report authored by Local Government Engineering Services, currently on public exhibition, and the Council engages further consultancy to design and survey the proposed upgrade.
As I've indicated to you, I don't agree with this recommendation because it's still on public exhibition, so we can't endorse it, but I take a certain amount of responsibility for extending the exhibition time. When I was up at Dumeric Dam a few weeks ago, there was no signage whatsoever that the proposal was on exhibition. So I asked that it be extended. So, I must take some of the blame for that. But since then, there's been the great news from our local member of a substantial grant. And this time the grant won't get away. While I'm here, it won't. So in relation to item 11.3 on page 66 of the business paper, I would move that Council A note a grant of $3,889,131 from the state and federal government through the Bushfire Local Economic Recovery Fund. B, note that public consultation for the project has been extended to 18 November and a report will be submitted to Council on outcomes. And C, authorise the General Manager to commence preliminary preparation of plans to ensure the project is shovel ready in February 2021. And I would declare that carried. There's a slight change on, you put the extra
dollar
figures.
figures.
Item 11.4 on page 69 of the business paper.
Mr Administrator, this recommendation is that Council prepare a costed option study for managing the environmental risks at the former Guyra landfill on Everett Street, Guyra, and that will include options for the future of the site.
Thanks. This is a difficult legacy matter inherited by the Council. Item 11.4 on page 69 of the business paper. I would move the officer's recommendation and declare that carried. Item 11.5 on page 71 of the business paper.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. This report provides Council with an overview of recommendations arriving from the Environmental Sustainability Advisory Group meeting of the 6th of October in relation to the establishment of an air quality working group, and recommends that deferring any decision on the air quality working group terms of reference and expression of interest until the conclusion of the advisory committee review.
I agree with this. In relation to item 11.5 on page 71 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation A and B and declare it carried. Item 11.6 on page 74 of the business paper.
Thank you, Mr. Interim Administrator. This report is presented to you to finalise planning proposal number 11 for a property at Madwick Drive, which is known as 20 to 22 Madwick Drive. This is the final stage in this planning proposal and seeks to use Council's delegations to make the plan.
In relation to this matter, as I've discussed with you, where I've come from, such a substantial rezoning carries with it voluntary planning agreements, and I don't want to see the opportunity lost. I know where this land is. I've been and had a look, and one of what should be a gem for this community, Jumeri Creek, adjoins it, and I think there are opportunities. So in relation to this matter, item 11.6 on page 74 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation A and B and add a new C, delegate to the General Manager authority to negotiate and enter into a planning agreement with the applicant relative to the subject land prior to final approval. I declare that carried. Item 11.7 on page 77 of the business paper.
Mr. Administrator, the purpose of this report is to seek endorsement of submissions regarding a number of Aboriginal land claims to the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment as outlined in the report.
Thank you. In relation to item 11.7 on page 77 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation A, B and C and declare it carried. Item 11.8 on page 79 of the business paper.
Mr. Administrator, this recommendation is that Council approve an additional $11,000 to enable completion of stage 1 at the hub at Guyra. Funding for the additional expenditure be identified in the first quarter budget review. And C, note that a variation has been sought to the deed of agreement to delete the external painting of the existing building from the final deliverables.
So this, if I adopt this, this commits the council in any event, even if you can't find the money in the quarterly financial review.
The work's been completed, so this is a financial.
Okay, thanks. Item 11.8 on page 79 of the business paper, I'd move the officer's recommendation A, B and C and declare it carried. Item 11.9 on page 81 of the business paper.
Mr. Administrator, the recommendation as the Council notes the response that it provided to the Natural Resource Access Regulator following a notice from NRA to provide information and records regarding the Guyra groundwater program.
Thank you. In relation to item 11.9 on page 81 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation and declare it carried. Next item 11.10, page 83.
Mr. Administrator, the recommendation was that Council endorse the draft park furniture style and design guide.
Thank you for that. Most councils have design guides or menus for facilities and assets that they build. If you start at Ebor and finish Ben Lomond or wherever you want, everywhere is different in this area, and the facilities at Ebor, particularly in the camping area, are nothing short of a disgrace. And through, I think it's Commonwealth money, we're addressing that. But I just think we need to take a breath and have a commonality where possible, so people know that they're in the Armidale Regional Council area, and residents can be proud of the facilities that they're exposing to people, whether you're coming on the New England Highway or Waterfall Way. But in relation to this recommendation, I just would like to see community involvement. So I would move that Council A endorse the draft park furniture plan and design guide being placed on public exhibition for a period of 28 days, commencing on 4 November and concluding on 1 December. And B, following the exhibition period and consideration of feedback, the General Manager is authorised to adopt the new guide if there are no submissions. And I will declare that carried. If there are submissions, it's important that this matter come back to the December meeting because we have to spend the money. So I think there's bound to be some submissions. You can't keep everybody happy in this world. So long as a report on this comes back to the December meeting, because we are committed to spend the bushfire money pretty quickly. I don't want to hold things up, but I think there should be some commonality. Item 11.11 on page 85 of the business paper.
Thank you, Mr Administrator, and I acknowledge the people in the gallery. The recommendation is that Council provide in principle support for the proposal of the Guyra Garden Club's proposal of Guyra Spring Flower Festival 2021, and B, provide a letter of support to the Guyra Garden Club for their application for external funding for the Guyra Spring Flower Festival 2021 proposal.
I note that I put a declaration in about this. In relation to item 11.11 on page 85 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation A and B and declare it carried. Item 11.12, planning proposal number 9 for airport rezoning.
Mr Administrator, this report pertains to planning proposal number 9, the airport rezoning. So it's a planning proposal for a draft amendment to the Armidale Generic Local Environment Plan 2012 in relation to the airport, and it has concluded public exhibition. The report recommends that the proposal is forwarded to the Minister for Planning, Industry and Environment, requesting that the Minister makes that amendment to the LEP.
Thanks. Look, I know you've only been here 5 minutes. In relation to this matter, I found this difficult to understand. There is so much going on up at the airport, and a plan in the advices would help residents with these kind of matters. Just identifying the location, it just would be so much easier than having to go through all the attachments and then have to ask staff at the end of the day. What bit of land are we actually rezoning? So it's just a constructive comment to make residents reading in particular of business papers much easier. In relation to item 11.12 on page 87 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation A and B as outlined and declare it carried. Item 11.13 on page 90.
Administrator, the recommendation is that Council commence negotiations to acquire land known as Lot 70 DP 655375 at Lower Creek for the purpose of supporting the Lower Creek Local Area Committee to construct a community hall.
There's been a lot of negotiation in this one. I've driven the big hill a few times now, but at last we've got an outcome. Can I move, can I make the officer's recommendation part A and then add a part B, be delegate the council and then A, commence negotiations, etc., as per the officer's recommendation. B, delegate, take the D off, to the General Manager authority to finalise the purchase. And C, the acquisition be the land be classified as operational upon acquisition, and I declare that carried. This again is a mixture of state and federal money from the fire grants that the Commonwealth and the state gave, and I know is supported by both local members who I've had a lot of discussions with about the reallocation of a lot of that money. Page 91, 11.14.
Thank you, Mr Interim Administrator. This report provides the assessment report undertaken by Council's planning staff and is recommending that DA 70 of 2020 be approved subject to conditions contained within the attachments for the construction of the 50 megalitre surface dam storage and the 40 megalitre bore dam storage.
Again, with this kind of matter, I think the conditions should be in the actual public document, so it's up front. As you know, I've spent a lot of time with the staff on this matter. In relation to item 11.14 on page 91 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation A and B and declare that carried. The next one is item 11.15 on page 93 of the business paper.
Mr Interim Administrator, considering the late submission, it was a very comprehensive submission received only last Monday, and the information presented this evening, I recommend that Council defer consideration of DA 77-2020 to the November meeting of the Council. And that will enable staff to fully address the issues that have been raised.
I understand that this matter has been on the Council's books for a while. Can you assure me that it will come back to the November meeting?
Yes.
Yes, I can.
Thank you. I think that's in fairness to all parties. So in effect, you want to address the new information that's been provided?
Yes, it must be addressed.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, in relation to item 11.15 on page 93 of the business paper, I would move that Council defer consideration of DA 7, well, as on the business paper, and I would declare that on the screen, and I would declare that carried. Item 11.16 on page 95.
Thank you, Mr Interim Administrator. The purpose of the submission put forward is to recommend acceptance of all submissions received from an open panel tender for annual material supplies relating to sand, gravels, topsoils, aggregates and concrete. The tender aimed to replace the existing contract panel arrangements from the 1st of November.
Thanks very much. In relation to item 11.16 on page 95 of the business paper, I would move that the officer's recommendation be adopted and declare that carried. And again, I congratulate the staff on putting these matters to open council, not closed council. Item 12.1 on page 98 of the business paper.
Mr Administrator, the recommendation is the Council adopt an updated draft policy for the use of public space by personal and group trainers, and B, exhibit the draft policy for 28 days and be provided with a further report following the exhibition.
Thank you very much. In relation to item 12.1 on page 98 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation A and B and declare that carried. Item 12.2 on page 99 of the business paper.
Mr Administrator, the recommendation is the Council endorse the submission of a funding application to the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment under Everyone Can Play program for option 1 extension of the playground located at Curtis Park to incorporate a nature playground with a total cost of $150,000. B, endorse the use of $18,750 of the $102,000 allocated under the 2021 Shade Replacement Program funding to be used for shade over this new playground as a co-contribution for the application. C, endorse the use of $56,250 of the $1,762,217 allocated under the Local Roads Community Infrastructure Program extension as a co-contribution to the grant application.
Thanks very much for that. Look, in relation to this matter, I visited the site today because of the earlier matter. on the question of the Creek Lands Management Plan, and I don't agree with this recommendation. I believe we should be going for option 2, which would be a substantial investment. Beautiful rain. It would be a substantial investment in the Creek Lands, and the Creek Lands is a gem, I believe, of Armidale. So I would move, as on the screen there, just changing to option 2 and $600,000, and endorse the use of $75,000 and endorse the use of $225,000. I think that's pretty clear for everyone. So it's option 2, and you know, let's get moving to improve Jimeric Creek and its surrounds, and at the same time improve the economics viability of the Armidale CBD. So I would declare that carried. The next item is item 12.3 on page 102.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. The purpose of this report is to endorse the submission of a funding application for the construction of the Jimeric Dam jetty to the Department of Primary Industries for a total cost of $228,000.
Thank you. In relation to item 12.3 on page 102 of the business paper, I'd move the officer's recommendation and declare that carried. Next item is update on Koala, item 13.1, page 104.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. The purpose of this report is to inform Council that we have been awarded funding to develop a koala management strategy and proposes consultation with some key stakeholders.
Thank you. In relation to item 13.1 on page 104 of the business paper, I'd move the officer's recommendation A and B and declare it carried. Item 13.2, page 106 of the business paper.
Mr. Administrator, the recommendation is A, the Council note the estimated costs of $4,592,106. Identified sources of funding are presently $2,068,197, and the timetable following the DA approval for the Guyra Early Childhood Learning Centre project, and B, endorse the engagement of CKDS Architects as the principal design consultant for the Guyra Early Childhood Learning Centre project.
Thank you for that. I have problems with this report and recommendation. There's a $2.5 million shortfall, and you know, when I'm long gone from this place and they're still building this, I'm not going to have the finger pointed at me saying that look what the Administrator got us into. I recommend that this matter be deferred for further information and declare it carried. Now, when I talk about further information, I'm talking about options for what you can get for your money or your sources of other income, but I'm just not going to head down a dark path of a $2.5 million shortfall. Next item is item 13.3 on page 110. You have to speak up.
Thank you, Mr. Interim Administrator. Cash and investments report is contained in the agenda. So it outlines the total cash held as at 30 September 2020, where those funds are invested and whether the investment portfolio is in accordance with the investment policy. As at the 30th September, Council had $73.7 million held in cash and investments, and those funds were held in compliance with Council's policy requirements.
Thank you very much. In relation to item 13.3 on page 110 of the business paper, I'd move the officer's recommendation be adopted and declare that carried. Item 13.4 on page 112 of the business paper.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. I understand that new arrangements are now in place that came in after this report was prepared. So I would recommend the council defer this matter for a further report as these new arrangements are now in place.
Thank you for that. In relation to item 13.4 and on page 112 of the business paper, I would move the amended officer's recommendation as outlined on the screen and declare that carried. Item 13.5 on page 114 of the business paper.
Mr Administrator, the recommendation is the council note the amount to be submitted in the funding application to Transport for New South Wales Fixing Country Bridges program has increased from $3,366,621 to $3,602,500 as a result of revised estimates made on the following two of the four bridges within the application. One, Lambs Valley Creek Bridge on Chandler Road will be revised from $340,214 to $440,000, and two, Laura Creek Bridge on Borsley Road will be revised from $501,907 to $638,000.
Thank you very much. In relation to item 13.5 on page 114 of the business paper, I move the officer's recommendation, including 1 and 2, and declare that carried. Item 13.6 on page 116 of the business paper.
Mr Administrator, the recommendation is the council note a joint submission for the reclassification of Kempsey Road has been made with Kempsey Shire Council.
Thanks. In relation to this matter, the final point on page 116 notes that the road is rated to accommodate B doubles, which would be absolutely impossible. I understand that sections of the road, can we just, is that correct?
Mr Administrator, the Traffic Committee is meeting tomorrow, so I can verify all of that if you like.
Yeah, it's just, I just can't see how B doubles could operate on that road, even on the flat areas with some of those bends down near George's Creek, is it?
George's River, George's Creek.
Yeah. Anyhow, okay. In relation to item 13.6 on page 116 of the business paper, I move the officer's recommendation and declare it carried. The next item is 16.1 on page 119.
Mr Administrator, I move that the minutes of the Sports Council Committee meeting on the 1st of September be noted.
Thank you. In relation to item 16.1 on page 119 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation be adopted. Item 16.2 on page 120 of the business paper.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. Could I please seek an amendment to the officer's recommendation to simply receive and note the minutes of the meeting of the Environmental Sustainability Committee held on the 6th of October 2020, and given earlier decisions made tonight, and to defer any other recommendations until after the advisory committee meeting, committee review.
So you're amending your recommendation?
Yes, please.
To that. I agree with that, excepting, well, let's just deal with that, then I'll give some undertakings. In relation to item 16.2 on page 120 of the business paper, I would move the officer's amended recommendation, which is just to receive and note and declare that carried. Now, in relation to item F of that recommendation, I undertake when I meet with the two ladies about the $60,000 to address that question, whether there is an opportunity to do something further with that report. But the rest of it, I agree with the staff, just hold it in abeyance until we get some better ways of dealing with all these matters, to put it short. Item 16.3 on page 122 of the business paper.
Mr Administrator, the recommendation is that the minutes of the Regional Growth and Place Activation Peak Advisory Committee on the 25th of September be noted.
Thank you. In relation to item 16.3 on page 122 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation be adopted and declare that carried. Item 16.4 on page 123 of the business paper.
Thank you, Mr Interim Administrator. This is the minutes from the Traffic Advisory Committee meeting held on the 6th of October and therefore noting and recommendations.
In relation to item 16.4 on page 123 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation A, B, C, D, E and F and declare that carried. We now move on to late items. I would move pursuant to clause 9.3 of the Code of Meeting Practice that late items 9.12, appointment of acting director, organisation and corporate services, and item 12.4, public library infrastructure grant application, be considered at this meeting, and I rule them to be of great urgency, noting their public notice of same was given on the 26th of October. I'd move that and declare it carried. Item 9.12 on page 3 of the business paper.
Thanks, Mr Interim Administrator. As required under the Local Government Act, this report formalises the consultation with Council on the appointment of the Acting Director, Organisational and Corporate Services.
Thank you. In relation to item 9.12 on page 3 of the business paper, I move the officer's recommendation and declare it carried. And Marissa, thank you for coming at very short notice. And for those who are unaware, the lady who was acting had her baby very unexpectedly. And so thanks for coming up for us so quickly. Item 12.4 on page 5 of the business paper.
Thank you, Interim Administrator. This proposal seeks endorsement from Council for the funding of up to $200,000 to improve the amenity and functionality of the Armidale War Memorial Library. In doing so, it'll improve the way the community engages with that library. The proposal aligns with the community strategic plan and the library strategic plan. And it's 100% funded and is recommended for Council to endorse the submission for the funds.
Thank you. In relation to item 12.4 on page 5 of the business paper, I would move the officer's recommendation and declare that carried. I think that's all the business. Just while I have the opportunity, if I could ask everybody, the officers in this room, to take back to everybody who works for you my appreciation for what's going on in this place at the moment. I don't get the opportunity to publicly say this very often, but I can see there's a lifting in morale, there's a lifting in confidence, and I think this agenda is reflective of that. It's onwards and upwards, as far as I'm concerned, for this organisation. And if you just take it back to the staff, thank you for the contribution you're making, John, take it back to your staff that the community will appreciate this. And as they see more of what's happening, and the council becoming more open and transparent, and I think I probably look forward to business papers in November and December of a similar size, but let's just get on with it. Okay, thanks very much. Thanks residents for coming tonight. It's a big agenda, and I declare the meeting closed.